Hey everybody, welcome to C3 Films. Today we're doing another episode for once in a very long time from before. It wasn't that good, and we're going to be talking about Velma today. So if you haven't seen it yet, watch it first. Spoiler alert, we're going to ruin it for you, but I'm sure you don't care because it wasn't that good. My name is Cheryl. This is...
Chris.
And let's get down to business. So, I mean, we had to talk about this today because it's been going around all over the internet. Everyone's talking about it in not a good way. And surprisingly, I feel like I have a lot to say about it.
hmm
I watched all of the episodes that are out as of today. So there's 4 episodes out. I know you only watched one.
hmm
Um, and I gotta tell you, that first episode is the worst one. So
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
yeah, and like honestly, the only reason why I kept watching it is because I really wanted to know who killed Brenda.
You have to discover the mystery. I figured that was going to be a mystery that they took throughout the entire show, though. So I figured that wouldn't be a mystery that got solved in the first couple episodes.
Yeah, it still hasn't been solved.
Okay.
And yeah, and I have a feeling we probably won't find out until the end of season 1, probably.
hmm
There's been more murders,
Of
so
course.
same pattern, so we know it's the same person.
hmm
Um, but yeah, I mean, I okay. Let's just start with talking about why we didn't like episode 1. And
Yeah.
I will say I feel like it does get more tolerable.
hmm
The first one was really like jarring.
Yeah, and a little obnoxious too with the comedy
Very
thing.
obnoxious, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's like the first, I don't know, like 5 minutes was all like politics, political opinion on current events, and like basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mindy is like the creator and like showrunner of it.
And the voice of Velma.
Yeah, and the voice of Velma. So it feels a lot like we're just being shoveled for the first 5 minutes how she feels about like everything wrong with society.
Including even the show itself, because they explicitly ask, "How do you feel about race blind casting?" in reference to the fact that they changed the races of Velma, Daphne, and Norville, not Shaggy, in this particular piece of work.
Yeah, and then there was also this whole thing about how like all you really need to have is a good story, and it was very ironic because they didn't even start the story yet at that point, and they were doing like the whole like nudity thing, and
Right.
being very like self-aware that they need to have that to like grab people's attention, and that's how like most series start, and then it like chills out later on. But all
Right.
you really need is a good story, and I'm like, well, where is it? Where is your
Well,
good story?
right. I mean, and it's like this didn't bother me as much, but I did remember hearing people were talking about this because it's easy to forget when you're watching an animated thing because animated characters can look like whatever ages. But the other thing is they were doing all that sexuality, and these are essentially 15 and 16-year olds. So there's that too, where it's kind of like, well, I get that you're making a joke, but this also feels like a strange joke to try to be making in regards to these specific characters.
Yeah, and I was really taken aback with the cockroaches
Oh
like
my gosh, yes.
humping each other. Like that was super extra, and I was like, okay, so it just felt like they were trying to be something like The Simpsons or like um, Rick and Morty, where they're trying to do like a satire, social commentary thing, but it's
hmm
very like in your face. Like it's very like not woven into the story. It's all exposition and no storytelling. And I think that's like the biggest problem.
Yeah, and that's the same thing about why I think the jokes aren't funny, because any joke is usually a story that leads to a punchline, and that's what makes an effective joke. And the stories that they're telling for these jokes just don't work. It feels like being crass for the sake of being crass. It's like the teenager that just learned how to say the F word and just says the F word all the time because they think it's cool, not realizing that you can say other words and people will still like you. So like that's the main feeling I got about just the comedy. I don't think that, at least in the first episode, that the comedy gets any more tolerable. But beyond that, like you mentioned The Simpsons and you mentioned Rick and Morty, the comparison that I was drawing was the comparison to the cartoon show Harley Quinn, which has a similar style where it can be very subversive. It's can call out social commentary and everything else like that. But like those other two shows you mentioned, the writing is good, the world is well established, and even if Harley Quinn herself can be kind of a jerk or a ditz, you have other characters you can fall behind and like. And for me, with this show, at least in the first episode, I found it very difficult to like anybody, including Velma. I think all these characters were very unlikable, and I get it's supposed to be a comedy, so you make people like extra stupid or extra mean, but still, it's hard to like get behind it. At least for me, it was.
Yeah, I mean, it also just seems like an odd choice to even use the Scooby Doo characters in the first place.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I saw remember that.
Because it really doesn't have anything to do with Scooby Doo, and Scooby Doo's not even in it. I heard it's because they couldn't get the licensing for the actual Scooby Doo character.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I heard. I might need to be fact checked on that. But I also wouldn't be surprised about that because I mean they don't have a Shaggy either.
Mm-hmm.
Like and I guess Velma, Daphne, and Fred are common enough names to not cross the line for like licensing stuff. But aside from that, like I think the point is that it the only thing that's even close to the original Scooby Doo characters are like the outfits and like the overall kind of general look of the characters
Mm-hmm.
and the three of their names.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like this and mystery solving, but it's like barely. It's barely anything
Yes.
like the actual Scooby Doo show. So I don't see the point in taking the guise of these Scooby Doo characters and kind of changing it up to be what it is. Um, at first, I was like, oh, it's an origin story. Cool. But they're
Mm-hmm.
nothing like the original characters. It's kind of like, I know we haven't talked about this, but it's kind of like Rings of Power, where Galadriel's origin story, she's nothing like the Galadriel that we've seen in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. It's the same concept here, where like they're nothing like each other, and it's hard for me to believe that they grow up to be what we are already familiar with. Um,
Mm.
and I kind of get it because I get like the diversity and everything and trying to change something like what we know into something else that's more
Mm-hmm.
modern, but I'm not really getting that because I think it's twisted so much that it's just completely unfamiliar. I don't even think of the Scooby Doo characters at all. Like these, they just kind of look like them, but
Yeah.
they don't act anything like the original characters either.
No, that's absolutely true. And thank you, chat. We see what you guys said. License issue, even if they wanted it. So, and then the mandate due to content. So even within there, it seems like that's two different things. Is it a mandate due to content, or was it a license issue? So that's interesting. But either way, like I was when I was watching this with my friends, when we finished it, he said that it felt like somebody who hated Scooby Doo made this show. It's like he said it felt like someone watched the show, watched Scooby Doo as a kid, and thought to themselves, oh, like this is stupid or this is dumb and blah blah blah, and then they went ahead and like made a show which just captured all of like how much they didn't like the show. Because I found myself asking the same question: why make it Velma? Why make it under the world of Scooby Doo if it's unrecognizable? Because these characters feel like they could have just been any other show. And I really think there's only one real reason, and I don't know that this is true, but I feel like it's because if they were trying to make an entirely new show, they might have felt like no one would watch it. But because it has like the guise of Scooby Doo world and characters, people will at least check it out. But when you do that, just like with Rings of Power, you run the risk of alienating like legitimate fans of that content because of the fact that they have such a love and a connection with the source material. So if you're going to do that, it's almost like you don't care about pissing off those fans. So if it's not for fans of Scooby Doo, then who is it actually for?
Yeah, and like aside from that, I do want to just say I want to give Mindy some credit for trying to be inclusive, because it's really hard with, like who is in the market and who is in like control of Hollywood right now, and stuff
Mm-hmm.
that like we get to watch that gets put out there. So I want to just like, give her some credit for the way she casted, and that she changed the characters to diversify and, be more inclusive of the different types of people out there to like, because it looks good. Like if it wasn't like so rough for the story and the comedy being, like what it is, like the fact that like if you were only to just look at the types of characters that are in this, and like who got casted, like the cast is so cool. Like we got Constance Wu, we got Wanda Sykes, I forget who else is in it, but like there's some good names in here that are not usually in these kinds of things. And um I just want to give her credit for that, because there's like A for effort there. And I know some people were kind of giving her a tough time about kind of typecasting herself, or
Yeah.
she plays the same character, and even in her own thing she's created, she's still playing her same self. But there's a lot of people in Hollywood who do that. So
Mm-hmm.
like, while yes, you can give her like crap for that, it's like it's a common thing. So and it kind of makes me angry that they're pointing the finger at her for doing this when so many other people do it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that the race bending is actually the least issue with the show. I actually don't think that's as much of a problem. I can still understand why people want their characters to look a certain way if they like are used to that, but then I can also understand trying to switch it up so that, it can like be for a more modern audience. I think there's a nuanced discussion to be had on the merit for utilizing um, already owned characters and established characters for your own ends, because that's kind of what Ryan Johnson did with The Last Jedi, versus making your own thing to tell the story that you want to tell, which is also what Ryan Johnson did with things like Knives Out. And like for us at least, one of those two movies is more successful than the last. So I don't think it's so cut and dry of, oh, she shouldn't have done this, or oh, she should have done this. I think there is absolutely a discussion to be had there. Um, but the point being, at the end of the day, that is not that the race changes are literally not the problem with the show. It is so far at the bottom of what is wrong with the show.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. At first I was like, why, or like what's the big deal? But um honestly, I think I don't have a problem at all with the fact that the race has changed. But I think part of that also has to do with the fact that these characters are nothing like the original characters anyway.
Yeah, and that's fair. Like the question I always try to ask myself, and it's like I said, it's not a one-to-one comparison, because the nuanced discussion is, okay, well, what if they took like Black Panther and then made him white? How would I feel about that? So like I try to like think about things like that. when discussing these like types of topics. But like I said, it's not so simple because there's all these layers about what Hollywood looks like, who's getting casted, and what faces we see more of, and what shows even got made in the first place because there was a certain group, there was a certain face that was attached to it and stuff like that. So, you know, because a lot of people were upset with Ghost in the Shell, for instance, you know? So it's like, I just always want to just try to think about how it would feel if she was on the other foot for me. But like I said, that's why I think it's more of a nuanced conversation as opposed to just don't do it.
Yeah. And
But
I also kind of get like Shaggy is not Shaggy at all, so I guess it
no,
kind
he's
of
not.
yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense that they changed his name to Norville. I don't know why
It,
Norville,
I
but
feel like that's his official name. Like that's always been his kind of official name, and his nickname has been Shaggy. Like we looked it up, and it's a long name. Like for instance, Sonic the Hedgehog has a real name that's like Oligarch or Oligar or something like that. So these characters actually do have real names. It's just that nobody knows what they are.
gotcha. Well, I mean, it just seems so stupid. Like I absolutely hated the part where he just like breaks the fourth wall and says, I
I'm
hate drugs."
drugs. Yeah, I
I'm
know.
like, why? Just like be normal and build it in.
Yeah,
It is built in, but then like he keeps saying, I don't know if it all happens in episode 1, but I feel like he says multiple times one way or another that he hates drugs, and I'm like, okay.
Steven is on the he's on his computer at one point when she comes into his room and he's looking at something about like why drugs are bad for our children or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, see, I feel like that would have been fine if they had that, they kept that, and like didn't have him actually say I hate drugs, because then you're showing, not telling. I mean, it's like not
Right.
the best way to show something, but like, you know, I get if you want to make these political statements, but weave it into the story a little bit. Weave it into the characters. Like, give it to us a little bit at a time. And I think it does get better as like the episodes go on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, there's this part in the. I mean, I don't. I'm not like a huge fan of it, but I kind of liked it because I think at the time I was kind of thinking about it because I was watching something else. But there's this part where they were requiring all the girls in school
Mm-hmm.
to take self defense, and
Okay.
then
Oh, I know what you're saying. I saw this joke in like the preview.
oh yeah, and then Velma said, why do we have to take that? Why don't the boys have to take a class for not murdering girls? And I was like, I feel like if Velma didn't say that and like some stupid person or some like other side character that has like a tendency to like to be dumb or like just not the brightest person said something that like eye-opening, would have been better
Mm-hmm.
than Velma saying it, because the whole time Velma's just like bitching about stuff and just
Right.
like complaining about how everything is. And I think that's also why she's like so unlikable. But
Yeah. She's
like
also
she's the
rude to
one
like
that
her
said
dad and
that, and I
stuff.
feel like if it was just a little bit different, it would have been like more impactful, and it could just be like straight out said like that.
Yeah, and it could actually still be funny because that's the point. It's supposed to be a joke.
Yeah,
Um,
it just doesn't
so
feel
yeah,
like one.
right, exactly. And there's so many. So there's moments like that, but there's also moments where they make references to I guess tropes that I don't. I'm like I'm pretty familiar with tropes, and I'm like I'm not sure if these are actually tropes. Like I think in the first episode they're talking about how the like these diners or these delis or corner stores are always owned by the wise black man or an Italian person with an Italian accent, and I was just like, is it though?
Yeah, I
And like
know.
and so like I think that's the other issue is that they make these like kind of call outs about like modern culture that don't feel instantly recognizable. Like like we were talking about like just for point of argument, like everybody knows in a horror movie the black guy dies first, right? So that's like a trope that no matter who you are, you're familiar with. So if somebody makes that joke in a show, you instantly recognize it and be like, oh, okay, yeah. And now it's funny because you understand that that's something that that's actually done. But I feel like a lot of these jokes are making references to things that, at least for me personally, I wasn't drawing the connection and being like, that makes sense. Um, and they do that a couple of times in the show for different tropes or characters. So, and I just don't think it's that really that effective.
Yeah, and I think like there were a couple times where I did think the joke was funny, like Fred called Velma a boy at some point. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
But that again is because they made Fred dumb. So
Mm-hmm.
that's also why it's kind of funny because
Right.
he's not intentionally being mean to her, but he just is very mean to her from his out of his own stupidity and not having the realization that he's being a jerk.
Yeah.
So like there were a couple of times that I actually thought it was funny, but all of those times had nothing to do with political statements or satire on
Mm,
pop culture
I
and
see.
stuff like that.
So then I guess like we've talked about the first episode a little bit now. Like I just want to kind of ask you, as someone who watched episodes 2 through 4, do you feel like it gets significantly better, or is it just kind of like it gets a little better?
It gets a little better. I wouldn't say it's enough for me to tell you, oh, you should keep watching it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I really want to keep watching it. I think the only reason why I am is because I just really want to know who killed Brenda.
The mystery's carrying you through. I understand that.
I like the mystery aspect of it, but all the stuff in between is like whatever. And I feel like it's slowing down a little bit. Like there's less mystery solving and there's more character building right now.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know how I feel about that because I feel like the stuff that's going on now should have been at the beginning and we should be getting like more into the mystery solving right
Mystery.
now. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, one other thing that I was told to think about was if you're not a Scooby Doo fan, you'll probably think the show is fine, versus if you're a Scooby Doo fan, you'll probably hate the show. So, and I feel two ways about that. On one hand, I can see like, okay, yeah, they like you said, they changed like the races of some of the characters. Like they're going by different names that we know them, at least some of them. There's no Scooby, so I think that is like a valid way to try and approach a show. But I also feel like if you have to do that in a show that is called literally Velma, that's named after a character in Scooby Doo, I feel like the show has already missed the mark. But that like that is actually like a question that I think that I would want to pose to like our chat and people watching this video. Like, how do you feel about that? And does it even make a difference if you look at it as a Scooby Doo, or if you don't look at it as a Scooby Doo show? Does the show like is the show now funnier, or less offensive, or better? And that's what I don't know. I'd have to like really think about that, or maybe watch one more episodes.
Yeah. I mean, at least for me, I feel like the part I didn't like was all the stuff I didn't need. And that is the poor jokes, the political statements. Like, it would have been fine if they just made a regular mystery thing. And, like I said, just kind of like buff out those political statements and just weave it in a little bit more instead of being
Yeah,
so in your
on
face
the
about
nose.
it. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's just so direct. But I would say this about anything that's so expositional, and that's exactly what this is, but in like a different way, because they're not explaining what's happening. They're just throwing in statements,
Right.
and they're not
Yeah.
letting us think for ourselves about how things are messed up. We're just being
Yeah.
spoon fed.
We're
Like
being
this
told
is
it's messed up.
wrong.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so therefore it's almost like it's not even respecting the fact that the audience is smart enough to like figure these things out if you try to be a little bit more nuanced and smarter about it. So, um I want to like there's a lot of things in the chat that I want to read, but for the sake of this video, I'll at least read what Playmat just said, where I think I only watched it because it was a Scooby Doo property and it didn't deliver. Given I would not have watched it as a generic show, and that is exactly why this was made the way it was. Yeah, and that kind of goes in hand with what we were kind of saying. earlier, which is why they have these characters attached. So it's an interesting conversation. Like I actually kind of almost like the fact that the show exists because it can get us to like at least talk about these questions when it comes to making shows and what goes into it and how what is the best way to like make or approach a show. And if you do use a show like Scooby Doo, it there probably is a good way to still tell a story that you want to tell with content that is important to you if you're smarter about how you weave it into like the narrative, as long as the characters and the show itself feels somewhat familiar to Scooby-Doo, or the characters themselves, like how they feel, even if it's still a comedy.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it really wasn't that good.
Yes.
But I give it A for effort,
Mm-hmm.
just like a
Yeah.
shirt.
Yeah. Yes, we're talking about the shirt that was a gift for Chinese New Year later. So, yeah, but okay, that sounds like that's everything that we felt about the show. Is there any like last minute thoughts that you wanted to like get off your chest?
Uh, no, I think that was it.
Yeah, so that's what we thought about the Velma. I watched the first episode. Cheryl was better than me and actually watched four. So hopefully that you find that helpful in deciding whether or not you want to check it out for yourself. But if you have checked it out, what did you guys think about Velma? Did you enjoy it? Do you think that we might be being too hard on it? Do you think that Mindy Kaling actually did a good job with the show, or do you think that she's not really funny at all? Whatever you thought about it, comment below. Let us know. And while you're down there, if you go to like, share, and subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and we'll see you all next time.